Yeah, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Christie David, and I run a mortgage broking business called Atelier Wealth, and we specialize in helping property investors start out and scale up their property portfolio. And I often say that, yes, loans are what we do, but we're really in the business of giving confidence to clients to help enable them to go on to make good, quality, confident property decisions. And as part of going on that journey, we really want to find people that have gone on the journey 3-4 steps ahead of you, that have gone on to help other investors build their own portfolios, so you can avoid paying the dumb tax and avoiding the costly mistakes that will set you so far back, but also put you in the right step and the right frame of mind to be thinking like a professional investor. The person I'm going to bring on today, he might blush if I say it, but let's call him property investing royalty, because if you've listened to an episode of Smart Property Investment Podcast, which is probably one of the premier investing podcasts, or you've had a chance to look under the hood of the portfolio of the SPI team, behind that is this group, which is Right Property Group. And Steve Waters, welcome onto the show.
Mate, it's a fantastic introduction. I think I might quit while I'm ahead, but pleasure to be here.
Mate, no, thank you very much for your time. And I think when we had a chat before, and I've reflected on my interactions, yourself and Victor. I think Victor's put out quite a few books. You guys have just put out a new publication recently. You guys were almost pioneers in the sense of this breaking into the buyer's agency space, the investment property advisor space, because I feel like when you guys have started, you've been around, for 18 years. That must have been such a brand new proposition. It wasn't even about buying the investment property. It's like, but hang on, why am I paying you to buy this investment property, and how does this all work, for example, as well, mate?
Yeah, look, when I've been investing since 2000, year 2000. Yep. And when I first started, the industry didn't exist, nor did really any decent advice. So it was a matter of suck it and see. And so I made plenty of mistakes to begin with. And I had some wins as well. And when I eventually became a buyer's agent, and don't hold me to it, I think there was probably only 5 or 6 of us in Australia or thereabouts. And it's flourished, it's grown since then. And I guess the ecosystem we created is exactly what I would have wanted back then in terms of that advice, support, and so on and so forth. Yeah, great. And I guess on that journey and evolution, we've seen things like Pippa, which I know you're on the board of as well. We've seen new benchmarks such as QPIA, so Qualified Property Investment Advisor, come out. We're seeing the prevalence of property investment podcasts, and we're talking before about Momentum Media, and you've got Investing Insights as well. There's so many tools and resources, and I guess benchmarks, accreditations now being set in place to help guide this industry through its next phase of growth, but also really to give consumers the confidence and buyers some type of, I guess, fallback that the industry is maybe self-regulating, setting itself a higher standard as well, isn't it? Yeah, and it's such an important thing. When you sit back and you actually think deeply about it, there's millions of dollars at play. Yeah. And I think now that, thanks to things like technology and education and thereafter, I think people are in such a better position today to absorb the education that is quite freely available, really, compared to yesteryear. And that goes all the way from the epicenter of the universe, which is finance, all the way through to advising, reviewing, property managers and the like. It's not something now that you have to treat it as a byproduct or as an on-the-side business as a property investor. Now you've got all the tools available for you to treat it with the respect that it deserves, because it millions of dollars, and be the best investor you can, because it is all there available for you. Well said, mate. It's resourcefulness is such a great trait for a lot of investors, where you can do it yourself and you can partner up and go on the journey. I think the partnering up gives you that exponential rise, which is the access to podcasts, for example, to self-learn. Then it's access to partners like yourself, where you pay for the privilege, and then you get access to people like Phil Tarrant and the team at Smart Property that share their own journey as well, which is almost invaluable, but becomes such a great learning and tool. And then you go on the journey of, I guess, other investors in the network and the community that comes with sharing their wins and also some of the setbacks that they've faced as well. It gives you the ability to collaborate, if you will, now. And as long as the people that you collaborate with are willing to share their bad news stories as well, because it's not all, beer and Skittles. We've all got war wounds from yesteryear, and I think those mistakes that we make hold us in good stead today.
Awesome, mate. Hey, before we kick off, it's what I call the 3 Ps. A bit about yourself personally, a bit about yourself professionally, and a bit about your own property journey as well, if you want to share and indulge us, mate.
Yeah, well, as I said, I started in 2000, and I was very fortunate back then to have a girlfriend that was investing before me. She's now my wife of many years. And she laid out the figures for me. I've always been self-employed, family businesses and what have you. And I said, look, that I couldn't make the numbers fall over, I guess is the short story. So I said, go out and find me a property. And within 24 hours, she found one, and I went to water. It was like too quick, too soon.
She called you bluff.
She did. But it was advertised for $110,000 in Sydney, and she negotiated for $105,000. So I blew up there as well, saying that's not enough off. But I bought it, and everything that could go wrong did go wrong with that particular property. I'd renovated it myself, which I love doing, but someone broke in and ruined the renovation. And then I tried to self-manage it because it's Steve Waters' property, has to be worth more for rent than everybody else's. So it stayed vacant for 3 months, and my wife just sat back and watched me make the mistakes. And so I eventually got a property manager in. Within 2 days, it rented out, and the same tenant stayed there for 9 years. But the most important thing with that particular property was I bought it at $105,000. 12 months to the day later, I refinanced it, revalued it, and it came in at $210,000. So that's a pretty good gain. And I thought, well, this is my thing now. And in that 12 months, I sold all the toys that I had, as you do as a young guy, and I went all in. And so in that 12 months, I think I bought five properties. So I was a recipient of some pretty good growth. Not all of them were good. Some of them were rubbish, as you do. And in fact, one of them was a off-the-plan service department in a holiday area. So and I recently sold that.
Ticking all the boxes there.
Ticked all the boxes of what not to do. And I recently sold that, not the Christmas bean, but the one beforehand, so the peak of the market, for a grand total of $30,000 more than I had purchased it for some 22 years ago. So that the moral of that story is, I guess, time in the market does not heal all wounds. If it's a dog, it's a dog. So I got rid of that after the ego had deflated, and I guess, and the emotional attachment had gone. But look, I've been investing ever since, and I sort of quit everything, the family business and everything, probably 3 years into it or 4 years into it, and became a buyer's agent by default, because friends and family were saying, "Can you get me what you've got?" Nice. And it sort of grew from there, and I've been doing it ever since. And the portfolio spans across the country. I won't go into the volume of properties, and there's quite an important reason why I don't talk about how many I have, because I don't want people to become hung up on someone else's journey in terms of how many front doors they have, because everybody has a unique circumstance. And I'm in the industry, and I go harder when I can and slower when I can't go hard. And the types of properties, because of my past skill set and present skill set, can be quite different to what Mr. and Mrs. starting out is. And as your portfolio evolves, so too does the type of opportunities that you look for. But would I like more? Of course I would. We all do. But being self-employed, as you would know, you're hampered by serviceability and the lending.
Some banks love us and some banks don't, and and
it's a revolving cycle. But it's personally, I'm just fully vested in it. I love everything property, and I know that sounds so cliche, but for me, it's a tangible asset. Everybody needs a roof over their head. I enjoy every component of it, from finance. Not that I'm a broker, nor would I ever be. Hats off to all you brokers, all the way through the whole gambit, I guess, or the whole process. It's just something that fits my personality type, and that's very important, and I enjoy it. So I've been fortunate, to say the least.
Well said, mate. Thank you very much. And I think there's something endearing about it's not about the number of properties that someone owns. And I've met investors that have quite a large portfolio, and I can tell you that sometimes it doesn't always equal happiness as well. And I think there's something a sweet spot about how much is enough for someone to be happy, quality,
Yeah.
quantity as well. And as you grow your portfolio, some are going to outperform others. So, like you mentioned, you're carrying a dog in there, but it's almost that healthy uppercut to go. You can still be close to it, but we can always still make a couple of errors in judgment as well. And you need that one to almost just remind you a little bit that that you're human too as well.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's not the quantity, or it's not how many front doors as we refer to it as. It's how are they performing. And I'll give one little example of my own portfolio. Up until probably 18 months ago, in one regional town alone, I had 18 properties.
Wow.
And I've had them for some time. And as a percentage value in terms of their growth, it was actually quite attractive. But when I reverse engineer the numbers, they were $56,000 purchases at the time. And so, yeah, they may have, I guess, all but doubled. It's not a lot in the scheme of things when you've got that capital outlay, especially in that one suburb. The yields were very good, circa 16% yields. But when you net them out, so a stove repair, instead of being, I don't know, Brisbane or Sydney rent, maybe 1 week's rent, that was like 8 weeks' rent to replace a stove, because it's a low value pool. So the net ability erodes very, very quickly. And had I had my time again, I probably wouldn't have bought that, because my capital utilization would have been far more effective elsewhere. So certainly not about how many front doors you have. It's what's the net equity position and the cash flow position.
And I think you've definitely said something there that when we talk to our investors, there's a couple of regrets. One is not buying more when they had the chance, like they had really good borrowing capacity, for example. But also one regret is maybe they bought a couple of cheapies too many. I'm not saying, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, they're calling it a cheapie, but you go, hey, look, I'd probably upgrade it to buy one superior asset than maybe three that, like you're saying, net on net return. It's like it's a very different number as well.
It is. And I guess the only caveat to that is what someone can afford. If buying Point Pipe or Wolseley Ave in Sydney, it might take you a lifetime to save up the deposit and get the serviceability, versus buying something in the affordable corridor of the same city. So I guess there's a whole timing and goal-orientated reverse engineering process to do it. But going out and buying something in the middle of nowhere just because you want to be that property investor and have a investment property, it doesn't always make sense.
Well said. And in our recent catch up, you kind of said something to me, which is this is a market like we haven't seen before. And I feel like we sound like a broken record, because you go back 5 years ago with all the changes around interest only lending, I was like, haven't seen this before. Then you had the Royal outcome, you go, haven't seen this before. And then you had COVID, like, haven't seen this before. And now we're in a different type of market, which is 10 consecutive rate rises, building slowdown, cost to build, liquidity on builders, migrations through the roof, for example, the rental squeeze, which is great from a yield perspective. Consumer confidence kind of is fluctuating a little bit. Look at a macro perspective from the global economy, and it's like, well, I'm not sure where we're headed. And you go, whoa, like, how does that translate to conversations that you're having with clients? And is it a matter of the noise, but it's hard to ignore the noise as well?
It's very hard to ignore the noise, right? Because noise is real to some degree. When I have these conversations, or these types of conversations, the very first thing I say is that there's always a crisis. The size varies. So we've got what we have today. As you said, we had COVID, we had APRA, we had an election, we had a GFC, we had the end of the low doc loan. So there's always, going all the way back to when I first started. So there's always some type of crisis from time to time. I think it's controlling what you can control, as we talked about, but it's also, I guess, when the opportunity presents itself from a household budget, from a finance scenario, and from a goal-orientated scenario, if you want to be the successful investor, no matter what the asset class is for that matter, you need to act when you can and when it's right to do so. If we fast forward to today and have a look at all these different components that are happening, and as I mentioned, it's never, all these components, all these pieces of the puzzle have never been present at one time. All the ingredients in the pot has never been there at the one time. And it's a very, very fickle market. It's an interesting market. And I think there is, and it's probably a big statement, but I think this period of time, there'll be a lot of people that lose a zero from their net wealth position, and there'll be a lot of people that add a zero to their net wealth position. Wow. I think those that are prepared are going to be the ones that really, really, I guess, have the advantage in the future, but of today's market. And I think one thing that we've been saying to our clients for the last 3 years is get liquid. I mean, preserve the cash flow, because it's not always about growth, because you can have all the growth in the world, but if you haven't got the household budget or the cash flow to support it, you become a statistic, right? You need to sell. Yeah. So you need that balanced approach between growth and cash flow, and especially that liquidity point of view. And not financial advice, as the disclaimer goes.
Yes. Yep.
But if I look at the sophisticated investors, they've drawn down all their equity to liquefy it, parked it back into itself so it's not costing. But now they have big buffers. Now they have perhaps the advantage to purchase again when others don't. So it's a multi-level, or it's a 1,000-piece jigsaw, I believe, to be a successful investor for the long run, and not put yourself into a position to be living on 2-minute noodles, because that's not fun.
Yeah, exactly. When you talk about 2-minute noodles, I think I was quoting on the Michelle Obama podcast, it's house poor, where they've got the asset, but the cash flow liquidity is scarce. And it's like, well, yeah, no one wants to be having a property portfolio and then eating 2-minute noodles, or not being able to buy that coffee, or the small little indulgences, because you're worried about every penny. But
it's a good point.
It's an abundance. It's really an abundance mindset to go, hey, look, we're coming into a very 10 rate rises. We can't be tone deaf to the fact that when my outgoings on my mortgages increase by 30 or 40%, something has to drop for me to pick that up. Like, correct. What is going to give? Yeah.
And it's a real thing, right? Like 30 to 40%. In some people's cases, it'll be 100%. Totally. More so than what it was before. But I think that whole household budget, cash flow management is such an important thing. And if I use the GFC, not that I think we're in a GFC, but if I use that as a moment in time example, and I go back when we were buying very, very hard, or we're buying a lot of properties during that moment in time.
Yeah.
And for clients and personally, when we did all the mortgagee in possession auctions, or we saw very motivated vendors, as an example, 9 times out of 10, it was because of a lack of cash flow management within their realm, whatever that may be, whether it be mortgages, no buffers, no savings, something, I guess, stupid debt, cars, boats, jet skis, credit cards. So a lack of cash flow management forced them to sell. Now, had they had the cash flow management skills and retain the property, and you fast forward to today, well, a lot of those properties have tripled, quadrupled in value. And I guess going back to my earlier point about time in the market which I think a lot of people misunderstand. And that example I gave of mine, where a dog is a dog, sometimes time in the market will clearly do very well for you. But if your lifestyle is suffering as a result of that, well, then decisions need to be made.
Yeah, well said. I mean, you're at the coalface when you're talking to new clients, but obviously being around for this long in business is no accident. So you've got clients that are now coming back to you who've been fairly successful in building portfolios. I mean, some of our own clients have engaged Right Property and have got great results. And so they've got that confidence, they've got the equity, they're able to go again and move forward as well. So when you're, so the question here is, buying across the country, I mean, the last couple of years, the whole market has been on fire, which again, haven't seen that before. The whole country's increasing. Right. Now that the tide is shifting, we're seeing some markets really kind of still have the accelerator on. Some are stalling, and then some markets are visibly dropping as well. So how are you now kind of reshaping those conversations with clients? Where are you looking to buy? And then how does this play out from a strategy perspective as well?
Yeah, an interesting point you raised, that during COVID, every square inch of Australia just about was going up, and that's just not normal. Yeah. And you could have been an investing hero by throwing a dart at the map. Whether there's longevity in that asset selection or that location is a different story. Yeah. But for us, at the beginning of COVID, it was a pretty obvious thing what was going to happen within the market, and the state and the undersupply that we have today and this rental crisis that we have today is not necessarily all because of COVID. It was because of APRA back in 16, 17. That's when the stage was initially set. So when COVID came around, we didn't just say, well, anywhere in Australia, we were looking at population growth, we were looking at infrastructure. We were actually, while data is such an important part of investing, data can also be very, very dangerous because you can Dr. Google the data and find whatever you're looking for. So it's very important that you utilize data as a bit of a directional piece, but the ground truth element is very, very important. An example of that would be Perth as an example. So for probably 18 months before COVID, we were doing our regular field trips to Perth to ascertain whether it was the right time to invest. So it was our fact-finding 18-month window. And we would do, the data was saying, look, it could be good to go in some areas, and other data was quite conflicting. So our ground truth exercises was speaking to local business owners, because they're a great tempo of the localized market. They're on the coal face, yeah. And
there's no filter with small businesses in the local areas there. They'll tell you exactly what they're thinking.
Exactly right. And I remember going to one part of Perth into a shopping centre. You couldn't even get a park in the car park, in probably one of the biggest Westfields in Australia. It was so busy. You go to a different part of Perth, and I remember going through a shopping centre, and I kid you not, the barber was asleep in his chair because he had no business. So we would talk to the local businesses. We would talk to the real estate agents who always had, I guess, everything's rosy. We would talk to local councils and sit down with their town planners and their mayors to find out what they had in the pipeline or what they wanted to do. So for 18 months, and then we started buying in Perth. We pulled the trigger probably 4 months before COVID hit. In fact, I think I got the last plane out of Perth because all those ingredients from a ground truth level, we could see starting to perpetuate and where it is today. And that's not just a Perth episode. We do the same in Sydney. We do the same in Melbourne, in the regional areas, in Brisbane. No matter where it is, it's not so much as I can get finance, let me go out and buy something. It's where will an area perform well for me? And then from a micro point of view, how will this asset plug into what I already have and complement what I already have, or how will it propel me into the next and into the next? So I think as an investor, you need to be methodical and strategic rather than blasé and, read a forum and find out where everyone else is purchasing. Because we're all unique.
Correct. We say that, like, we've had buyers agents kind of share, like you're saying, buy in Perth, and you could give away the exact suburb, doesn't guarantee success, because there's a secret sauce, there's a trained eye that comes with identifying the actual opportunity. The property may, especially when you're buying as a borderless investor, you may not see some of the hidden costs. I mean, those rains that came through on the East Coast, for example, obliterated some people's properties, and now they're like forking out mega cash to repair some of these properties.
That's great example. And Brisbane's very good. And we've been the recipient of some tremendous growth in Brisbane. However, Brisbane is such a unique area where, and I'm going to generalize and sort of overstate it, but every second street floods. Not really, but a lot of it does. And then you can have a street, half of it floods and half of it doesn't. And a lot of people just went into Brisbane and purchased because they were riding the market. The diligence wasn't there. And there was very little difference in the data in a booming market between what floods and what doesn't. You fast forward to today, and the properties that are flooding or have flooded because they're in those streets, those corridors, or they might be on the back of a freeway or underneath high tension power lines, they've all but capitulated. Like, no one wants to purchase them, right? And that drags the data down for the localized area. Going back to my point around understanding the truth behind the data, so buying anywhere, like if a buyer's agent says you should invest in Timbuktu, that suburb specifically, within that suburb, as you know, there's all these little inconsistencies, how many bedrooms, what type of house, construction, flood, non-flood, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think just being very blasé in the approach is a dangerous recipe for the medium and long term, unless you're just of that speculative nature and you're riding the tail of the tiger in a boom market. Well, that's your flavor. That's your flavor, but it's not mine.
Well said, mate. Going back to, I guess, the success that you've had in Right Property. So certainly not blowing any smoke. You guys have obviously done something right, built quality portfolios for clients. Being on the journey, you've probably had some people that have come back to you going, oh, I did it myself, and now they've come back to you, or maybe they didn't engage your services at the start. And then you've almost got this like test group, like group A control group, and then groups that have partnered with yourselves and seen the acceleration from here compared to the people that maybe didn't make that decision or pull the trigger. I've certainly been guilty of that at times where I'm like, I haven't pulled the trigger and the opportunities have presented itself, and hindsight's a wonderful thing. But take me through, like, what are some of the hallmarks of success? What are the, I guess, when you're looking at someone going, if you really want to get to where you want to get to, when you want to get to, is what I'm trying to say is, what are you seeing as those, I guess, unique identifiers, mate?
I think it's respect, not just to themselves, but to the asset class and how professionally they want to approach it. Now, whether that be they utilize the services of someone like us or whether they do it themselves. And on that, if you do it yourself, as long as you're all in terms of your, not necessarily all your assets in the one asset class or your investments in the one asset class, but you need to be all in. It needs to be methodical, strategic. You need to educate yourself. You need to give it the time that it deserves to research, analyze, and then execute. Yeah. And there are people that can do that. If I look at myself, because I'm, I don't know, quite detailed and I don't know, some would say OCD, I would probably be one of those people that would back myself to do it because I would be just all in terms of that time focus. Everything else wouldn't matter to me. And that's not necessarily a good trait. But those that are time poor, those that don't have the ability to research or even decipher data, well, then they should probably engage the services of someone. However, there's a big difference between a buyer's agent and a investment advisor. So a buyer's agent's role typically is you go to them and supply the scope. So I want a 4-bedroom house with a green roof on the moon. An investment advisor, their job is to create the plan, reverse engineering, and then the buyer's agent side of them is to implement the plan. The advisor's role is also on the back end of ownership. So it's once you take ownership, it's not set and forget. I truly do believe that. So the advisor's role is to continually consult with you so that that asset is performing to the best of its ability because they're in the market every day. So they know all the different components. Whereas if you got a real job, potentially your mindset or your bandwidth isn't fully focused on that. So some people can do it themselves, and I would implore them that they do. Yeah. For those that don't or can't, you're not buying a very cheap widget. So you want to build that team around you, and everybody always talks about the team. The finance expert, I think, is essential. Correct. Whether you do it by yourself or not. I think a great accountant, emphasis on the great, is very, very important. Maybe there's a fin planner in there as well. And if there is an advisor, then that's great. But the key to a good team is collaboration. So your team members need to be able to collaborate with each other and brainstorm ideas so that they can be very clear on what the next step is. And everyone brings their expertise to the table in and around the client's circumstances. The problem that kills a team is when egos get involved. When someone thinks they're better than the other and that their advice is more important or more clear. So the team is very important. Collaboration is equally as important. Mate,
well said. I think that's one thing that we talk about with clients, which is you get a high caliber team, but we need to be singing off the same hymn sheet, or like you can't be building a house of two different blueprints. Like we've got to be very much aligned. And I think that's where, and it's not the financial plan or the account saying something that's contradictory. It's like, we should buy through a trust. It's like, well, this is what will happen. And it has a different outcome as opposed to when you're going to sell that property versus hold it and what entity you're going to buy it in. And then also from a borrowing capacity. So I think, getting a team that's aligned, highly professional, highly skilled, for example, I think that's where I've seen the secret sauce in play versus the actual asset. I think people put the emphasis on the asset as opposed to the team.
Correct.
As well.
Yeah, good point. And like, I personally don't like email chains. So you've got all your 4, 5, 6 team members involved, and there's a 2-kilometer long email chain. It'll get lost in translation. I'd rather call a Zoom, let's call it board meeting.
Yeah.
Everybody gets on the Zoom, everybody brainstorms, someone takes notes, and then we go from there.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I'm a bit different. I don't know.
I think that's the shortcut for success. Otherwise, you got emails and everyone's bandwidth to respond, and what gets exactly lost in translation. Some detailed, some are very short, and brevity is key. But I think, if you put the client at the center of it and you go, right, what do we need to help this client? Unique, tailored individual. Let's get them there as quickly as possible and as soon as possible as well. Hey, thanks. The other question I've got for you is the outlook on the market. So I'm not going to kind of hold you to this. And like I said, in all our podcast episodes, this is general in nature, not intended to give advice. So please do seek out a professional for advice. But what's your view of the market? We're kind of, what are we, the first part of the way through the year, so kind of mid-March. How do you think this plays out this year?
I think we're going back to a normalized market, is what I think. And what I mean by that is something is dropping in value, something is going sideways, something is going up. That's a normal market. As we said before, not everything goes up at the one time. I think there are pockets within markets that the media are reporting on that are supposedly got blood on the streets. And I can hand on heart tell you, we are not seeing blood on the streets anywhere. Now, that doesn't mean that it won't come, but as of today, there is no blood on the streets in a collective sense. I think, without sounding like, one of those property guys, it's a very unique set of circumstances that we have. As we all know, we're massively undersupplied. If you're a tenant, there's real concern around affordability, if you can get a property, and so on. Clearly, rates are an issue. And so is inflation. So I think the markets that have the best debt to income ratios and affordability, let's bracket it that way, will continue to do well. I think areas with a lack of affordability, and I'm talking about metropolitan cities here, I'll touch on regional in a minute, but those that have a real lack of affordability, you could nearly compartmentalize into 4 quarters. And let's take Sydney as an example. There are parts of Sydney that I've seen drop between 25 to 28% since the end of COVID / rates increasing. Putting that in context, they also grew by about 60% in 3 years. So it's a rationalization of historical growth averages. As I mentioned earlier on, anything with warts on it, like bad warts that you can't heal, they're really suffering. But well-located property that has an element of affordability attached to it is doing well. And this is in the Sydney corridor. I know the media the other day, there's a couple of media stories that came out saying that we've seen the bottom of the market. And auction results have been fantastic, but that's just it's not a strong indicator, in my opinion, auction results at the best of times. I'm not sure that we have seen the bottom of the market in a very general sense. There'll be pockets that definitely have. And there'll be other pockets that I believe may hurt for a little longer yet. In fact, probably about 4 months ago, I call it a bold statement, if you will, for the Sydney market. I thought that the end of Q2, beginning of Q3 this year was going to be probably that sort of bell curve opportunistic time to purchase, generally speaking. But I think there's value in the Sydney market. Melbourne's almost a mirror image. Brisbane, I know the data and the media's data is saying that it's dropped horrifically, but I'm telling you that it hasn't.
I'm with you. I mean, I was in Brisbane very recently. I'm like, you see it Saturdays, like the opens, there's people coming through these properties. I mean, my brother's up there and rents were going up by about $120 a week extra in that corridor where he is. I'm like, that's insane. Like people are having to
madness.
Yeah.
It's like we went. One of the team members, the buyers agents, went to an open home on the weekend, and there was 45 people through this open home,
Yeah.
and it's sold for 20% more than the asking price or the price
Yeah.
guide, let's call it. Now that's the sign of quite a buoyant market. Admittedly, if it had been underwater, under power lines on a freeway, you're not going to give it away, right? So I think there are areas of Brisbane that'll continue to do well. And the Olympics are coming. It's not the reason to purchase ever, but it's a great branding exercise for Brisbane. It'll put it on the map of the world. Sunny Coast, Gold Coast are probably just slipping a little bit because of the absolute extraordinary growth, but you can't rent anything. So that's underpinning, those declines. And you could say that across Australia. Perth is doing well. Darwin is doing okay, but it's a very fickle market for anyone entertaining Darwin. South Australia is holding its own. Once again, nothing to rent there. And Tassie, you could say the same. ACT is probably slipped a little bit. There's quite a lot of supply in the pipeline. And I guess that's the key here to look for the future is these areas that have performed so well, how much development has gone on in the last year or so, even with the builders scenario that they have at the moment. But what's going to be here complete in, say, 2 years' time? Will that flood localized markets, I guess? An example of that might be Adelaide. Adelaide's, and this goes back to the example about just because a city is going up, that all of it is safe in terms of an investment. So a lot of people, or some investors, are buying too far outside of the CBD for me. Now, I'm not a CBD investor as such. I'm not one of these people that say the closer you buy to the CBD, the better it performs. I think that's a load of rubbish. In Adelaide's circumstances, if you're an hour outside of the CBD, you're in a middle of nowhere, in an exaggerated comment. And I've seen those areas over the last 10 years not do a lot, but closer into the CBD, so let's call it the half an hour, 35, maybe 40-minute ring, is super, super strong. And we've done very well out of that. Now, if I take those same time distances and bring it to Sydney, an hour outside of the CBD, you're still in the hub, right? Yeah. It's so you've got to be very careful, I think, when people are looking at areas and even down to a regional component. What's regional for one state is not regional for another. Take Geelong of Melbourne, which we heavily invested in probably 4 years ago and 5 years ago, and they've done very well. That's an hour from the CBD, but they call it regional. You take that to Sydney, an hour from the CBD, let's call it Wollongong or Central Coast, give or take. We don't classify those two areas as regional. So the markets are all quite, I guess, different from each other. I think, once again, affordability is the key here, but it's not just affordability on the top line. It's also down to income per capita versus average debt. So if you took Perth, probably the best DTI, debt to income ratios in the country, yet very affordable. You take that through to Sydney and it's a little bit different. So I wouldn't call it a buyer's market, and I wouldn't call it a seller's market. It's a nothing market. It's a normal market. It's where it is. And ultimately, the biggest problem that we have is the fluidity of credit, which I think is going to be one of those big trigger points, as we discussed, and also government intervention. I think we were talking about that prior, whether it be stamp duty reform, builder's grant, first homeowners grant, second homeowners grant, whatever it may be, even pressure from state governments to local council, which I just saw happen last night, to change its LEP because there's no accommodation. It's going to be a massive difference to the market moving forward. The crystal ball time frame is no one knows. I don't even think the powers to be know. So it's a matter of setting yourself up, if you can afford to do so, and if you're psychologically sound to be able to do so, that you're not going to buy today and make $1 million tomorrow. You should never be that anyways. But But what we're seeing in today's market is probably more choice, better quality assets with less competition than what we did, say, 2 years ago, when you could sell a Portaloo on your front yard for $1 million.
Correct. Well said. Well said. Perfect. Just to wrap up, there's something that I checked out. One of the resources that you've got is called Design a Decade. And there's a great saying that comes to mind, which is people overestimate what they can do in a year versus underestimate what they can do in a decade. And when I saw your downloadable, I jumped on. I was like, this is a pretty good resource. So take us through what was the birth of this brainchild, and what can people do to access this resource as well, Steve?
Look, the reason we created it was because, I don't know, there's this fallacy within real estate that everything doubles every 10 years. And so that's kind of this benchmark. I'll buy it today, in 10 years it doubles. And 10 years is a hell of a long time. It's not true that in 10 years it doubles. 10 years is a hell of a long time. The years are long, but the days are short, as the expression goes. And so for us, most people, they have a goal, and the goal is, this grand goal that I want to retire on passive income of X and be wealthy and whatever it may be. And that's this sort of big pot at the end of the rainbow, but they haven't really mapped out how they're going to get there. And when you don't map out benchmarks or milestones along the way, you become very jaded when you haven't hit that goal in a certain amount of time, because you've had no wins along the way. So the Design a Decade is really about a 12-month time frame, 3-year, 5-year, 10-year. And each of those time frames have benchmarks that we want to be hitting. And the 12-month benchmark might be, I just want to buy one property. Or it might be, I want to get myself into a situation where I've got rid of bad debt to enable me to be able to borrow for good debt. Let's say it's a property within 12 months. So it's a workup period. By year 3, we want to have a couple of assets, good performing assets in the portfolio. Now, obviously, we can't judge markets and timeframes, right? Year 5, it's about assessing what we have. And it might be a matter of, right, what does the portfolio need? As an example, I'm being quite general. Yeah. Or are we in a consolidation phase, whether it be forced upon us or whether it be because we desire to be? And the 10-year benchmark is not about retiring and living on easy street. It's about, I guess, having created a portfolio that's performing well. And from the 10 years on, how do we now pay this down? How do we make it unencumbered? And so the decade starts again, I guess, for part B of a more dynamic portfolio. Now, obviously there's gives and takes in it, and no plan is ever certain because all our circumstances change, as does the economy. But it's just a great starting point for people to be able to map out some benchmarks to keep them interested. Because as you tick these goals off in these shorter timeframes, you feel like you're achieving. Yeah. And I guess not the take up, but it's been received very, very well because it just makes you think at the end of the day. And if people want it, it's just just go to our website and they can download it there, and maybe it stirs some juices, or maybe it doesn't.
I think it definitely will. I mean, I had a look through it. I was like, I love it. I love being able to kind of zoom out and go, where am I working towards? And there's a really good analogy that we're being given, which is when you're trying to build the fence, like post to post, you can start here and then build it and work forwards, and it kind of goes wonky. But if you start backwards and you build the posts and you can kind of build it as you go backwards, and you line it up, things line up straighter. And
that's a good analogy. I like that. I'm going to use that in sales.
Go for it.
It's but I think that's really important. I mean, I think it's all good for people to have this dollar perfect plan and modeling scenario, like I say, a fin planner might do for the future. Yeah. But I can nearly guarantee you your plan between now and then and your circumstances will change. Have a set of twins, change jobs, sail the world.
Correct.
So it's very important that you're always fluid and you're always reassessing to accommodate those choices in life.
Yeah.
So that you're not, I guess, cornered down one street and one or avenue only. It's a work in process. That's what a Design Decade is.
I love it. We're going to include the the details. If you want to check out the resource, for example, we'll include the link. If you want to check out the website for Right Property Group and get in touch with Steve and his team, by all means, we always say do your due diligence, find the right advisor, property investment advisor, or the right buyer's agent to suit you and your needs and your goals, and who you feel really, really aligned to as well. But most importantly, if you've got any questions that you got for myself or Steve, please drop us a line. We'd love to get your questions answered on another episode as well. So that's a wrap for this edition of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. Steve, I want to say thank you very much for your knowledge, for sharing your insights and your wisdom, mate. I really, really appreciate it.
Mate, thank you for having me. It's been a blast. I could do this all day, and I'm sure you could.
Absolutely. Yeah,
it's pretty sad, really, isn't it? We should get out more often.
Well, I mean, it comes. I look at it as. And I've been thinking on it, like we got a few clients that are now starting, new clients are starting to reach out to us. They've been listening to us for a while, for example. And I really feel like it's a responsibility that we have to share the insights and knowledge, because you and I work day in, day out with high caliber investors. And there's only so many conversations that you and I can have in a day, really, or our team can have in a day. So if we can take that, bottle up, give it to people to consume or enjoy in their own time, then if you want to reach out, great. This is not a commercial thing at all. This was really born about to help our own clients kind of build their own knowledge and confidence. So I think when the intentions are pure, when the message is very clear as well, and this is who we are, I think that resonates or strikes a chord with people. And that's probably why we get a lot of enjoyment from it as well. Beautiful. I'll leave it there. And
not always commercially orientated.
Yeah, exactly, mate. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you guys very soon. Thanks.